When we move work items through Jira, sometimes we need to make a field required when we transition it from one status to another. Figuring out how to do this, though, can be challenging. So let me show you how it can be done. When work items move through Jira, they'll move through a series of statuses in the workflow. Now, how it moves between statuses is called a transition. And that transition is something that you can add additional screens to capture information. For example, you might be familiar with a transition when you close a work item. It asks you to set a resolution and add a comment. Or maybe when you move it to in review, it asks you to indicate who should be the reviewer. Now, the feature that allows us to add that screen is called a screen. This lets us identify which fields we want to pop up, so when someone makes that transition happen, the screen will appear with the specific fields we need them to fill out. As Jira admins, we have a lot of control over which fields appear on these screens, and we can even make some of them required or mandatory in order to finish the transition. This is incredibly useful in some cases as we want to encourage and force users to fill out certain fields. Ideally, we can rely on them to remember it, but many times folks will forget, or they'll be so quick in their job, they'll not fill in the field. So, as admins, we can force this. We're going to jump into Jira Cloud Premium and take a look at how this can be done in both the old workflow editor and the new workflow editor. What we're going to be looking at is called a validator. This validator lives on the transition and will enforce that field to be filled in. The validator lives on a transition and can do various things, but in this case, it will force a field to become required. There must be some value in it, or it must have some other thing to be true in order for the transition to happen. So let's jump on in to Jira Cloud Premium and see what this looks like. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick reminder to hit the like button if you like this video, and check out the links in the description and up above for some learning courses about Atlassian products I've got. All right, back to it. Here we are in Jira Cloud Premium, and the first thing we have to do is identify where we need this screen to show up. So in this example, I'll open up a workflow in a service management project and examine the workflow. Now, in reality, I would figure out where to put this based on behavior of my team. Where are they forgetting to add information? Or by request, they're asking for some help by inserting this field. Now in this example, I'm going to add a screen on that transition between to do and in progress into this in progress transition. However, you can add these screens to pretty much any transition you have inside your workflow. So in this screen, I'm going to add some additional fields, like maybe assignee and priority. Although depending on your setup, you may add more or less fields. So now that I've identified where it needs to be, I have to go into my Jira admin panel under work items and build a new screen. Over on the left, I'll just create a new screen. Now ideally, I can find an existing screen to use. However, in this example, I'm going to make one from scratch. Now your team likely has their own naming convention for screens. These can quickly get out of hand, so please work with your team. In this case, I've named it after the project and then which transition it is. Although, as your organization grows, you're going to want to review these to make sure you get the most utility out of them. After all, these screens can be used in multiple places. Next, I'm going to go look for my screen. I have my support in progress, and I'll open it up. Here, I can define which fields appear on this screen, and I can also add tabs, which is a very neat feature. I have used tabs to include additional information, for example, extra hyperlinks, or something else that someone needs to know, but they don't want on the first tab when they open it up. In this example, I'll just add the assignee and the priority fields to this screen. Although depending on your needs, you can add different fields that are available in the project. And that's it. My screen is now available. I'm going to go back into my project and open up that same workflow. Now, here I have the workflow in the new editor, and all I have to do to add the screen is click on the transition I want, and then on the right, scroll down until I see rules, and click on the plus. From here, all I'll do is click in screen, and click show a screen. This will give me a list of every available screen that I could show, so I'll just type in the name of my support screen, and click add. Now I'll click Update Workflow, and I'll go take a look at this work item and see what happens when I make this transition. Here I have a brand new work item, and I'll go up and transition it into In Progress. And what I'll see is a screen appear that matches what I've set up. I've got the assignee and priority fields in the same order they appeared when I set up the screen. Now, one thing you will notice is these are not marked mandatory at this point, so someone could just click Update and move through this without filling anything in. So now to make these fields required, I have to go back to my workflow editor, find the transition I need to make them required on, and look under Rules. Here I'll hit plus. And now the rule I'm looking for is validate a field. I'll hit select. I'll indicate which action I need to take. For example, it is not empty. I'll type in the field, assignee in this case, and I'll also go find priority. So I can list multiple fields in one validate, and then I'll provide an error message. This will pop up if one of these fields is not filled in, and then I'll just click Add. And now I can see in the bottom right, ensure that 2 fields are not empty. Now when I click Update, and I go back to one of these work items, I can see this in action. Here I have my test ticket, and I'll move it to In Progress. And if I try to update this, we'll notice that I'm getting an error message, enter an assignee. One thing you will note is priority already had a value, so I'm not forced to enter one. However, the validator still worked because it's forcing me to enter an assignee. The other way I can add a validator, if I go back into my workflow and click Edit, is to switch to the old editor. And this is what many of us might be used to, but I'll click Edit, and then click on the transition I want to add the validator to. And we'll notice here I have 2 validators for this one already. I'll open it up, and I can see that I have 2 for field values. Now from here, I can add new ones, or I can edit or delete them. So if I add a new validator, I could click Add Validator, and then select the kind of validator I need. For example, I might have one that field must have a value, field required, or it must be changed. The list of validators we have here doesn't necessarily match the new editor, so we can switch between them depending on what our needs are. So now that we know how to make a field required, I'm going to call out some common mistakes or pitfalls that I trip over quite a bit. The first is anytime we change a workflow, we have to publish the draft. And this makes sure that it's live. In the old editor, we'll get an option to save a backup copy of the workflow. I recommend doing this just in case you need to revert or take a look at what happened. But if you don't publish it, then the associated items won't get that new workflow. The other big thing to keep in mind is workflows are connected to work types. So just because I've made this change here in this simple workflow doesn't mean it impacts every work item in the project. This gives me a lot of flexibility, but can be frustrating if other tickets in the project use a different workflow or have a different work type. And also for these validators to work, the fields have to be available in the project. If I don't have access to the priority field in the project, I can't require it to be entered when someone is working on the ticket. So that is a quick overview of how to make fields required during a transition between statuses in Jira. We've got both the new and the old editor, so depending on your preference, you could use one or the other. You can also switch between them as you saw me doing. I am curious, though, what kind of challenges or frustrations you have working on Jira work items, especially with workflows. And also, how do you handle more complex environments? With just a single workflow, it's very easy, but when you have giant teams, it gets a lot harder. So share your tips and tricks below. Check out the description for more content and more information, including a Discord channel where I've got about 250 folks chatting about different Atlassian things. And I really hope to see you again in one of these soon. Me again, thank you so much for watching that video. Check out more here and pop down into the description. I've got a blog with weekly content. I also have a lot of online learning on Atlassian stuff and project management. And if you need personalized training for you and your team, reach out and let me know. I'll be happy to get something set up for you. Thanks again for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again soon.